Welcome to episode 61 of the Food Grads Podcast, the podcast where we explore careers in the food, beverage, and agricultural industries. I'm your host, Veronica Hislop, a PhD candidate in molecular science and career partner with Food Grads. This week on the podcast, I interviewed Sandra Ulewicz, Communications Coordinator at the Ontario Produce Marketing Association. The OPMA is a not-for-profit organization that represents and connects individuals and businesses across the produce industry in Ontario. OPMA prides itself on being a hub of information for all things fruit and vegetable across the province of Ontario. On this episode, Sandra and I talked about all things communication and why she decided to go into the field after she graduated from Ryerson with a degree in foods, nutrition, and wellness studies. Sandra shared some insights into what she does for her role at the OPMA, the skills that are essential to the role, and some misconceptions associated with the Ontario produce industry. Additionally, as an organizer of the Young Produce Professionals Group, Sandra gave us some good tips on what students can do if they feel nervous to network. We rounded out the episode by talking about what skills Sandra herself is looking to level up. If you're a student that is currently going through school and unsure what you would like to do when you graduate, then listen to this episode. I think that Sandra's story is one that will provide comfort and remind you that you don't need to figure out everything when you're going through school. It's okay, try different things, try new experiences, and just become a fuller person because you never know what's on the other side. So you don't always need to rush. Just take your time. So, enough with that introduction. Let's get on with the show.
Yeah, so I started my journey in nutrition at Ryerson and learned really quickly that the science part of it was not for me. So in like your third, fourth year of that program, you kind of get to do more marketing and different types of courses, psychology, economics. So you really get to explore food in different lenses. So from there, I really liked the nutrition communications, like that course a lot. I really still love nutrition and learning about healthy eating, but I knew that I didn't want to be a registered dietitian. So after taking those types of courses, I kind of got to know through a friend's mom who was working in communication, who had been working in communications for her whole career, about that field and looked into that. So I started the program at San Antonio College, postgrad in corporate communications and public relations. After that was done, I started my career in agency and then landed here at the Ontario Produce Marketing Association.
That is amazing. It's interesting that you say, so I personally have a deep connection with Ryerson. As many of you know, I go to Ryerson for my graduate program, which is molecular science, but I TA first year nutrition students for their food science course.
That course made me cry many times.
I get told by the students as well about that. So I know with that course, it's probably the same as when you were taking it, because actually the funny thing is they do the same version of it but for the science chemistry students. So like I've also taken the same labs, and a lot of the students are like, I love food, I love this, but I don't like the science part. It's a tough course.
That was the first bad mark I ever got in my whole entire life, and I bawled my eyes out. It was like, I'm not a D student. I can't get a D.
I totally understand. I get the students saying it as well, and I'm just like, it's tough when you go into university and then all of a sudden you go from high school to university and like the expectations and the time, like you're like moving like really fast. But I did want to talk a little bit more about, so you did a communications for nutrition, like explain that a little bit more, because I wouldn't have thought that was talked about in the curriculum.
Yeah, at Ryerson, it kind of explored like how to market food, and on the other side, like public health and kind of like Health Ontario and how they communicate messages. So during COVID, we saw a lot of that, of how health messages were being communicated, whether it's like posters on different walls of like how to wash your hands simply, or the health, the food groups, things like that. There's always messaging going out. So it explored that. It talked about like how food is marketed and communicated in different countries, and in Canada, food labels, how to read them, how to communicate to people, and how to read them. So there's a lot of different things that can be talked about in that.
Wow. So, I mean, that obviously led a little bit of a way to where you are. So how did you make that decision to do the the certificate? Is it a certificate at Centennial?
It is, yeah, it's a one-year program. I spoke with my friend's mom who had been working in communications her whole career and was like, "Oh, should I do a master's? Like, what should I do?" And she's like, "It's better if you get work experience because in communications, you really want to be hands-on. You want to be doing those exercises, those projects." So the college programs were a lot more hands-on. Everything was group projects. There was no exams. It was all just assignments, and you had to complete an internship to graduate. So that was solid
Okay.
work experience on your resume, which you don't get with most university programs. So that kind of led to that decision versus doing like a master's or something like that.
Okay. So I know the degree was in corporate communication. So like,
And
no, I think
PR.
NPR. Okay.
Yeah.
So actually, I want to talk a little bit more about that because we hear the word communications, but when I think of communications, it's like what we're doing right now. We're talking back
Yeah.
and forth. But like, what does communications look like for? We could even segue to the OPMA if we wanted to right here. But could we talk a little bit more about like what is communications for like a company or a brand?
Yeah, so you can have internal or external. Internal is if like any kind of like change management or any types of like communications that go out about like through the company, depending on how big it is. So for us, for example, there's a lot of member communications. So the Ontario Produce Marketing Association is a nonprofit association that's member based. So all of our communications going out are to the members. So whether it's about an upcoming event or things happening in the industry, trends, or whatever is going on, anything like that could be changes in roles in management. It could be kind of anything that's going on. It could be you need somebody to be communicating it. And externally is for consumers typically in most companies.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay, so I can understand why places need someone who's focused on communications because it's it's I also find it like such a fascinating role in itself. Like when you think of a brand, for example, like you think of them in a certain way, so they have to communicate in a certain way.
Yeah.
But to have someone with that foresight to figure out what's wrong, what's right, because it's not just like one communication, it's constant. But then at the same time, one thing could like really throw everything off if someone did it
Yeah.
improperly. So, would you
Yeah.
be able to tell me a little bit more about the OPMA and what you're doing? Because I know they're really important to Ontarians and they really support our food system. So, tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So the organization as a whole over is like an overhead organization with members in the produce industry across Ontario. So this is growers, it's retailers, it's wholesalers, it's anyone along the food supply chain. The office is based at the Ontario Food Terminal. We're working from home now, which is great. It's a team. We have a team of 4 people right now, so we're really small. And it's yeah, so it's member based. So all our members are across Ontario. And we support them by creating networking opportunities. So we have events like we have our big annual gala, we have the golf tournament, and then we do other smaller networking events for people to meet other people in the industry, make those connections. As you know, it's like all about building connections in any industry that you're in. And the other side of it is education. We send out communications, newsletters, things like that about things that are happening in the industry, trends, like what people should know, what buyers should know, what wholesalers should know, like what are consumer trends. We do research that we share with them so that they know what they should be, what kind of product consumers are looking for, what they should be like what kind of messaging consumers are looking for. And we also help them build and execute marketing programs to consumers if they're a brand that needs that. And then the last bigger piece is we support Student Nutrition Ontario, which bring fresh produce to schools. So we make a donation every year that comes from different ways that we fundraise and earn revenue to provide to them. And they then take that and purchase fresh produce for students in the program.
Oh, that's so cool. I never knew that
Yeah.
that was a part of a program. I can imagine that. Wow, that's because Ontario's produce industry is like massive. I can imagine there's so many avenues and it's kind of like exciting because you have like, I can't even, like, list how many different types of produce there is in Canada. I mean, you have your corns, you have your berries, you have your apples, it's amazing how plentiful we have it in Ontario, and you kinda take it for granted, at least like I
Yeah.
do, like, I don't really think about it as much as I should, but you could really eat everything you want, it seems like, in terms of that.
For sure. I didn't even realize until I started working with all the different commodities. I was like, "Oh, yeah, I feel like mushrooms are grown here, like,
Oh, yeah.
greenhouse peppers and and apples and peaches, like everything's grown here.
I know.
Yeah,
And
we're
one thing
really good.
Yeah, and one thing that I know that you are involved in that I really wanted to talk a bit more is that you have a young professionals group.
Yes.
And I would love to know about okay, let's do a two-part question. So let's talk about like what roles are there for young people who are looking to go into the produce industry? So what could they look to for jobs? And then as well, more about the group that you're actively helping with and how that helps them go into the
Yeah.
industry.
So it's funny because a lot of people that you talk to and you think about agriculture, people are like, oh, farmers, but and
Mhm.
growers. And that's kind of like, if you want to work in agriculture, that's the direction you're going in. But there's tons of other things that you could do from marketing, obviously, sales. You could be working on logistics. You could be working you could be a buyer, you could be a wholesaler, you could be working in so many different positions at like a retail chain. There's just so many options. Quality assurance. Yeah, off the top of my head, those are a few. There's probably more that I don't even know about because I'm still 2 years in and still like learning about all these different pieces of the puzzle. But there's definitely for every interest, like there's so much going on and so many different opportunities for different skills and interests. So the goal of the Young Professionals Network is to show people what the different options are, what you can be doing, meet other people in the industry, whether it's people who are young and like new in their career or new to the produce industry. It's always good to connect with others. We host speaker sessions and workshops to help people with their professional development and learning about other people's journey in the industry, having mentors speak, doing fun networking events, things like that. So it's really
Awesome.
a place to network and learn about the industry and learn skills that will help you succeed in your career.
And is that virtual? Because Ontario is a very big place as well. Is it both in person and virtual, or is it a combination, or is it just one or the other?
It started in 2020, so it was mainly virtual. At the time, we were doing the committee is made up of like 10 people,
Mhm.
and we were doing all our monthly meetings virtually at the time. We were also doing all our speaker sessions and workshops virtually at the time as well. Now, then it kind of started to move into hybrid, and we would do some like little things here and there in person. And this year, next year in 2023, it'll mostly be in person.
Oh, that's amazing.
It's hard to network not in person. It's hard online for meetings and things like that. But generally, like people love, and we've just had like so much better turnout to everything that's been in person, and people really like to get together and then once you start making friends in the industry, you're like excited to go to those events. You're like, oh, like I met these really cool people at the last event. I can't wait to go to the next one.
For sure. Like I know with I like having the virtual things in terms of like if I'm maybe like watching a presentation or even doing
Like
like
a meeting or
yeah.
yeah.
But then, like, I went to a networking event recently with Witham, so the Women in Food Industry Management, and I went to go get a drink, just, I'm getting a drink, and someone just, like, pops up beside me and starts talking, and, like, you just can't have that same connection on Zoom.
Yeah.
Like, even if you do the breakout rooms, you do that, like, so much things happen by just, like, walking by somebody and maybe they
Yeah,
observe something, and
for sure.
it's a lot more scary, but it's so much it's nice.
Yes, 100%. Like once you get to know people, you don't feel as scared to go.
Yeah, for sure, and that's, like, something I've learned as well, like, when I went to my first ever networking event, terrified, I was like,
Oh
"This
my
is
gosh,
this is"
yeah.
it's so scary, and, even if you have, like, a purpose and you're just like, I don't know," but then once you start to go a little bit more and you're like, "Oh, I'm actually gonna see someone I know again," and, like, I want to go talk
Yeah.
with them again, so it's nice, and I think that's one thing that's been really nice about I can imagine as well with, like, your networking events with the association is that kinda becomes like a little family, like, it's not as
Yeah.
competitive, I would think, so
Yeah, you build really good connections and you wanna help people and, you're always having these conversations that ultimately lead to good things happening to everyone involved. Where you're like, "Oh, yeah, I remember that person I met at that event was actually looking for somebody who's offering that service. I should connect them."
Mhm.
And then you, like, build all these different it's always, like, interconnected, I would say, in every industry and not just in produce.
Would you have any suggestions though, like for a student who maybe this is their first time ever going to one of these young professional events and they're like really nervous? What would be the best way to kind of low risk break out of their shell when they were like really scared?
Drag a friend along, even if they're not in the industry, like, bring someone you know. And I think that would help me probably, but if you want to go alone, when you go alone, you also have more opportunities for people to start a conversation with you, I think. If you're standing in a big group, like, people probably won't approach you, but if you're by yourself, like, somebody will approach you and someone will talk to you, and I don't know, I guess be in the mindset of, like, what's the worst that'll happen? Like,
That's
what's
true.
your biggest fear? Because I feel like mine is that I'm standing there really awkwardly and nobody talks to me. But that's not gonna happen, and you know it won't, and someone will talk to you, or you just have to go up to someone, maybe prepare, like, 3 conversation starters in your head, and just go up to someone and ask them something, and, like, no one's gonna I don't know. I don't know what our biggest fears are with those things, that someone's gonna be like, "Oh, I don't wanna talk to you." Like, no one's gonna say that
That's a good point.
realistically.
That is a really good point because I know that I think about it, like, I've been to the events and I've stood by myself just, because I was nervous and then someone did come up to me. Like, I
Yeah.
feel like as well, you kind of have the benefit because you're younger, because I think that does make you stand out in a positive way, just because I
Yeah.
think people are more likely to acknowledge that they're probably not in the association and they're probably nervous. So,
Yeah, yeah.
mhm.
For our event specifically, but I think maybe also look for events that have activities associated with them, because then you're not just like standing there like, oh, like what should I do? Like who should I talk to? But if we try and do like icebreaker games or have like long games or something, like something for people to be doing where you're more likely to interact with people so you're not just standing there.
That's really smart as well because I know,
Yeah.
sometimes it is competition or just like little games, like it gets you focused on yourself, like focused outside so you're not as caught up in your own head because it can be
Yeah.
so easy. It's like, what do I say? What do I say? What do I say? But then if you're like you said, playing a game, like you just focus on that and then you just happen to have a person beside you and you're talking about the game
Strike
and it
up.
just
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
And then with the organization in terms of the young professional event, you mentioned like workshops that you do. What kind of workshops would those be?
So in the past year, we did one about how to like brand yourself. We've done them about how to build your interview skills, how to build your resume, things like that. So in the
Mhm.
future, it'll probably be things that are kind of around professional development of I don't know, like leadership skills, how to conduct yourself in different situations, things like that. Just things that'll help that are more interactive than like a speaker session, but that help you build skills.
And did you find when you were, because I know that you mentioned that you talked to your family friend and that's kind of what got you into this area. Were you like during your actual years of university, were you like actively promoting your brand, so to say, like as we talked about? Because I know that some students can end up in their fourth year and they didn't really like promote themselves as much as they would have liked for varying circumstances. Did you find that you were actively putting like feelers out or any of those types of things, or you were able to really jumpstart your career, a little bit later when you graduated?
Definitely later. I was like
Okay.
I had no idea what I was doing in my first 4 years of university or, like, first my 4 years of undergrad. It really was just like, I know I don't like this, but I don't know what I like. I don't know what to do. Like, was definitely not really thinking about a career or my career at all, really. Like, I was like, "I need to do something, but I don't know what it is." And kinda just trying to get through school, and it honestly felt like it went by so fast. Like, every semester would just be over, and I was, like, so stressed for those however many weeks that I don't even know. It was, like, the
Mhm.
8 week the 10 weeks. It was just so busy and so stressed. It was like, "Oh my god, it's over. Okay. Now you need, like, a breather." Because I was also working a part-time job. I was on the cheerleading team at Ryerson, so everything just kinda, like it went by so quickly, and then summer comes around, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, okay. First year is done. I need a breather." And then, yeah, we graduated university, and that summer, I went backpacking Southeast Asia with a friend, and I remember just sitting on the beach in Thailand, and I was like, "What am I doing with my life? Like, what am I actually doing?" I'm done university, like, now what?
Mhm. Oh, wow. I see, I did wanna kinda bring that up because I think that I'll say, like, I was always actively trying to do so because I was in a chem degree, so I was, like, always worried I wouldn't be able to go in the food thing, but it's hard being a student, doing your classes, it's not easy just to get through classes, like, irregardless of the rest of your life, and then
Yeah.
if the financial strain, and then you're trying to think of your brand and then friends, and you actually have to live and enjoy it for a little bit, like, so it's nice to hear that, someone doesn't necessarily have to have it all together right
I'll
when they
figure it out.
graduate.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
you were able to I'm assuming you where you are now, like you're happy with the roles that you've been taking on and you were still building from your undergraduate degree, but you weren't starting your own food business in your second year and now all of a
Yeah,
sudden it's like your
exactly.
full thing. So,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think there is a piece of that using those 4 years of university to really explore because you get to meet so many people. There's so many clubs you can join. There's so many different classes you can take as your electives and things like that. And really, like, no matter what degree you're in, I think there's just such a big opportunity to really be more open minded and just kind of trust that life will work out and things will work out. Obviously, like you do need to work hard for it. And I still tried really hard in school and all my classes, even though I wasn't necessarily sold on going in that direction. It was still like I need to get good marks. So it's still trying and still like working very
yeah.
hard, but there is that chance to explore different things. And yeah, different opportunities. You also have 4 months off in the summer, which you'll never have again in your whole life. So that is such a good time to do like really like focus on your passions and figure out what you love. Like whether it's taking an extra course about something that you're like maybe like, oh, maybe I'm interested in this, or working at a job that like you want to test out, like an internship or something like that, or traveling. I think any of those things, that's the time to do it because you will never afterwards have that much time off.
It's so true. It's so true. And it's like, it's so cliche, but it is true. Like when you're in your younger years, that's the time you're supposed to be exploring. Like there's less of a risk. You don't have you don't have a family. You don't have something that
Yeah,
if you make a big mistake for a lot of students, maybe not everyone, but you have your parents or your family members or your friends. Like there's just a little bit more of a cushion so you can
yeah,
explore. And if, like you mentioned with the clubs, if you don't like a club, you don't have to sign up for the rest of your days.
exactly.
So that's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. And you're meeting so many, like in any university, you just meet so many people. Like I feel like my experience was so different. In high school, you're kind of in this bubble of like people you've known since you were young. And everyone kind of like obviously grew up in the same neighborhood and had, I would usually assume like a similar upbringing. We're all taking like the same courses. You're in this like little high school bubble. And then you get to university and you really get to meet people from all walks of life, especially at Ryerson.
Mhm, and especially with the clubs, like, the clubs really get you to introduce to other types of people because, your courses, you kinda stick with the people that you know your courses, but when you do the clubs, like, you could be people with the film
Yeah.
program, you could be with people from the business, like, it's all over the place.
Yeah, yeah, and it's definitely a good chance to not be so siloed of, like, even if you go into first year being like, "This is what I wanna do," like, you never know, there might be something else that catches your eye or you wanna explore a different passion that you've always been like, "Oh, I would never work in this field." Maybe not, but maybe that's the time to be in that club and still do something that you love on the side. It feels difficult because you just feel so busy, but it's still you gotta make time for it. I think time for the things you love too.
That's for sure, for sure. And I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit more back to you because I do want to learn more about communications manager because I've been hearing this like kind of going around because I feel like there's more companies are hiring communications
Mhm.
managers considering like social media is so big now and just
Yeah.
communications is everything. So I wanted to talk more about like what your day-to-day life kind of looks like. So what are some of the main responsibilities you do? What are maybe some strengths you need to do in order to be successful at your role?
Talk to people a lot. You're always talking to people. It's very interconnected. There's lots of calls, lots of emails. I know everybody probably says this, but every day is very different. So sometimes there's days where you're just sitting and doing emails. There's days where you're going to do an event site visit. There's days where you're at a networking event. There's just so many different things that are happening. Social media is definitely a huge part of any communications role now, which also can include sometimes like video editing, graphic design, photo editing, like all of those creative aspects. So creativity is important and is something that will certainly help in these types of roles. We also work a lot on different events, partnerships, sponsorships. So building out kind of like sponsorship practice for people and then creating the content that goes out for that and driving revenue. A lot of times your communications role is like marketing. So it's connected directly to sales. So you're really trying to drive sales with your messaging and your intercommunications. The most important, I think, strengths or personality traits is people skills, which is quite intuitive, I would say, but it really is about being able to write an email that clearly communicates what you're trying to say, being able to hop on a phone with someone and not be scared to talk to them on the phone, being able to go to that networking event and really just like connecting with like talking to people, making them feel comfortable. Like it's really the people skills are really integral to a communications role. I think the one piece that's kind of like intuitive and I wouldn't say impossible to learn, but it is kind of, and some people just naturally have it, is being more intuitive about people's like, it's like that empathy piece of understanding what people's needs are and how to have that conversation with them.
Okay. I'm going to jump in on that because we use that term. That almost seems like something that's like built into somebody if they're like born to be it. Like, is that something that you just have naturally had, or has it been something that you've tried to build upon or try to build up that you're more able to predict like what the needs of maybe your client are or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's like natural to a degree, but has definitely been built up over the years of working in like client-facing roles and agencies. And I've also worked in hospitality for many years. So when you're a server, you're definitely you learn a lot of really good skills. It's actually how I got my first like full-time job was they were like, "Oh, you've been a server before? You will definitely do well in an agency, in a communications agent than like a PR agency." Because it's kind of that piece of like, yeah, understanding what people are needing and wanting and how to speak to them about it.
I love that because again, you don't think about these other roles that,
Yeah.
working at a fast food place or working at a restaurant, but those take a high level of like emotional skills,
Yes.
communication, like can't just like
Stress management.
for sure stress management. Oh my gosh, I don't know how my dad does it. He's working as a cook, but
Yeah.
it goes to show like I remember when I had my job, they were asking me, did you not put anything on your resume that you wanted to include or we didn't have space and I said, "Well, I worked at like a fast food place," and they're like, "You should have put that on there. Like that would have been so relevant." And I was like, "But it's not in the industry specifically." But they're like, "Yeah, but you learned so many skills from there that we would have loved to have known a little bit more." And then fortunately, they were open and able to talk, but you never know what you leave off the table.
Yeah, that is actually a really good tidbit of advice because that first job that I got outside of like internships outside of school, the VP and like was also the hiring manager in the interview. She was like, I worked a serving job as well. And I think that people who are able to be successful in that role, because not everyone is, will be
Mhm.
successful in this role. So that was a huge reason why I got hired. So yeah, there is limited space on your resume, but maybe bring it up in an interview if you can, if there's even
Mm.
any type of like overlap or you just want to like share something fun about yourself. You never know.
That's a good point because if you don't have it on the because I know that with sometimes with these like auto generate I don't know what you call it for the resume search that like do the
Yeah, yeah.
keywords. Maybe if you do get the interview, it's a good place to just talk about it. So
Yeah. Even sports teams or clubs. Tell them what you're doing. Like tell them that you were part of this club and you were organizing their financials. Like that's huge. Or
that
you're
is
on a
true.
sports team. You learn team building. You learn confidence when you're in sports. Like, there's a lot of different skills that apply. So
Well, as well, like with that, does that mean maybe I'm segueing in a really random way that I'm trying to get it out there, but I wanted to also talk about this industry as well, like the produce industry, because I feel you mentioned that many people think about farmers and like that's the only type of role. Is there any other maybe misconceptions that someone may have about the industry that you'd want to dispel?
I don't know. I think that was the one that I that I had in mind to share.
Maybe what
I
about
don't know, like,
maybe about your own role? Maybe there's something that people might think communications is all about, but there's, like, something more.
I think people think it's all about social media now, but there is obviously a lot more that goes into it, like we talked about. In the produce industry, I don't know, I guess before I started, I didn't realize how much produce is grown in Ontario and how good the industry is, honestly, like, how
Mhm.
high quality all of the things that the growers have to do for quality assurance, like all their certifications that they have to go through, making sure that their farms are up to standard, they get randomly checked. There's so many processes in place. There's just so much that goes on behind the scenes. And I also didn't know how many like random disasters growers deal with. Like
Okay.
there could be like a pesticide outbreak. There could be like bad weather one season and their whole crop is gone. There's just so many like little things and it really makes you appreciate the food that's on your table. 'Cause I think it's really easy for us to just go to the grocery store and we expect everything to be available and everything to look perfect.
Mhm.
But yeah, even things like farmers saying they have to ship off like export some produce because consumers here are really, really into how it looks really good in Canada and I guess probably the US as well. But sometimes, your carrot can have a dent in it and it's still perfectly good carrot to eat. So there's just like so much behind the scenes that's going on that everyone is working through and working with, and it's really makes you appreciate the food that's on your table. And anytime you have some good fruits and vegetables, like I always think about it now, but I feel like I never did before.
Well, now that you mention it, like when I think about the news and all that, it seems like you would think they would report a little bit more about Ontario, but I only hear about California. Like I feel
Yeah,
like whenever there's like a drought or something, like I don't even hear much about the Canadian food industry, which is I find so like that's always been something I found so odd when everyone talks about like, jobs in Canada, all that. We're always talking about the sorry, pardon me, like the auto manufacturing. But I feel like there's such an oversight about talking about how big our food industry is and how we
yeah.
need more people in it. And I just like I'm having conversations with families and friends about it and they don't know about it. And I'm like, I don't know why the news isn't talking about this. Like, I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, and there's been so much, like, even so much I've learned, honestly, in the past, like, year since we've been able to do more in-person stuff and do, like, farm tours and things like that with schools and with media and influencers, learning about all, like, their sustainability practices, their innovations that they've brought in. For example, berry growers, some growers have invested into tabletop growing, so it just makes it a
Okay.
lot easier for the people who are picking the berries so that their backs are not, like, bent over on the ground all day because berries grow on the ground, so they have it at, like, hip level. So it makes the growers or it makes the people picking the berries their day, like, a lot better, and it makes it easier for them to pick berries and more efficient. So we get more crop out of Ontario in the season, in this berry season. So just things
Oh.
like that, like, I feel like people should know that, and then it just really makes you appreciate, like, oh, these growers are really investing into these cool innovations. They're doing different things to work on
Mhm,
sustainability, changing up their packaging, doing research into different ways that they can be more sustainable with, like, water and waste reduction and things like that.
mhm.
And we I guess we just don't know about it.
Well, if someone did want to know a little bit more about it, like you being the communications manager over here, like what would you recommend people follow or check out if they wanted to learn more about the Ontario produce industry or like where should we go to?
Yeah, we share a lot on Produce Made Simple. That's the consumer facing platform for the OPMA. And each commodity also has their own like website and Instagram, like Berry Growers of Ontario and Ontario Apple Growers, Ontario Tender Fruit, Ontario Canada Mushrooms. Like they all have their own websites that have a lot of info too. Farm and Food Care Ontario has their 360 videos that you can see what it looks like inside. But yeah, we're also working, like Produce Made Simple, we're working on creating a lot more video and photography content with those behind the scenes kind of things that people I think are interested in knowing. We were doing like interviews with farmers and those are doing really well and asking them like what their favorite part of the job is and how do they like to eat their potatoes, things like that. And then doing more little tidbits and educational pieces about the sustainability and the innovation and what's available and the seasonality and all of that.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna have to get those links from you and
Yeah,
share them because I
I'll
think
send them
that's stuff
over.
like I would definitely want to do because that was like something as well I was also thinking about is just like how does produce like promote themselves as like a brand? Like I know okay, so it's
Yeah.
Ontario produce and then you have like Ontario berries, but like how do you promote something that's not Oreos or like Lay's potato chips? Like
Yeah.
how like what does that look like in terms of getting people to eat more berries, let's say?
Yeah, we try and do those educational pieces that I just mentioned and tips, like usage tips, how to store them, how to pick them at the store, when they're available, when they're in season. So all of that like educational stuff, nutritional info, so people know how healthy they are and why you should have more on your plate at every meal and recipes.
Mhm.
Feel like when you're scrolling through and you're like, "Oh, that raspberry recipe looks great. I'm gonna go buy some raspberries this week and make this."
Well, this sounds like awesome in terms of like finding a marriage is something that really suited you because I know like you mentioned earlier, or maybe this was another time about how you went into the nutrition program because you wanted your, you care about your diet, you care about food and like promoting that, but you found a
Yeah.
way that like really synergizes with your love, but then also communicating and maybe not being in the hard sciences in a dietitian. And I think that that is really cool.
Yeah. Which is another, I guess, thing to, like, trust that you'll end up in the right place and to always go for things even if they're not exactly what you had in mind. Because I actually got this job, went to Australia for working holiday, and that got cut short when COVID hit, so I came home and I was just like everyone was locked down. Finding a job at that time was so difficult. I was like, okay, I just need a job. Any job will do, like anything. And kind of started doing some like freelance work and then came across this posting, but it was part-time and a 6-month contract. And I was like, oh, like I really need something full-time. I in a 6-month contract and a job hunt all over again in 6 months. Like this really isn't ideal. But you know what? I'm just gonna apply. We'll see how it goes. And then obviously ended up getting it. 6 months were up. They offered me full time, and here we are 2 years later. So you
That's
never
amazing.
know. Yeah.
And like I think that's another good point because I know a lot of food industry places will maybe do like a contract work, like speaking more towards like food manufacturing. A lot of,
Yeah.
QA positions are covering maternity leave and all that, but you never know where it's gonna take you.
Exactly.
If you can take that like little short-term hit, like a lot of times it does be fruitful for like a long-term
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. You never know where it'll go. If it's something you're truly interested in, I would say go for it.
Yeah, and as you've picked up this role, has there been anything that coming into now you've been the full time, has there been any skills or maybe like any topics that you are personally interested in right now that you're actively trying to improve?
I would love to improve on my like graphic design the skills and leadership so that I can gain some leadership management skills, people management skills.
Do you have any ideas of like how you're going to go about that? Or I think that actually opens like another new thing. So like a lot of times we learn our skills, we go to school, we get our classes, we get it. But then when you're in the real like the working world, you kind of have to rely on yourself to be a little bit more of like a self learner. How do you tackle something like, leadership is a very broad word. Do you have any ideas of how you'd like to kind of build that up?
I'd love to do like a certificate or some courses next year. For other things, I've definitely just like graphic design of doing stuff for Instagram. I just go on Canva and I like play around with different things and like try and read some articles, watch some tutorials and apply them and kind of like teach yourself and just but it's not at a graphic design level, but we're doing our best.
That's okay. It's
It's
it's just
fun
a
to play around
facet.
with it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's as someone who's done like I help out with like food grads type of stuff in communications, it's you really realize how not strong you are. Like it looks I don't mean to put people down, but like sometimes you're like, oh, that's so easy to be able to do. And then you go to do it and you're like, this is not easy. I cannot think of anything. And it's just you don't realize how much of a skill graphic design can be.
Oh
Like
my
it
gosh,
really
yeah.
is.
It's such a fun creative outlet, but yes.
It,
I try and yeah, get inspired by other people's work and then kind of try and go off of that and get creative, but it's tough.
it is.
And you're like, why doesn't this look good? Other people make it look good. I don't get it.
Oh, I know, and Canva, though, it's amazing. It's also great how many tools have made it so much more accessible to do it within, like,
Yeah.
the past, like, 10 years or so, like, before, if you wanted to do any graphic design, like, you had to use, like, Adobe Photoshop or you had to
Yeah,
do, like, these really advanced ones, but Canva is a game changer.
I know. That's great. Even photography, sometimes you're just like you and your friend are taking a photo and you're like, why does your photo look so much better than my photo? We both just took a photo of the same thing. So it's like other people can make it look easy, but
For
we'll
sure.
just keep working through it.
Yeah, and I think that that also is a little bit of an exciting thing that you might not necessarily realize when you of course, work can, like, be busy, but I feel like there's a little bit more time to kinda grow and understand yourself because like you mentioned earlier with school, you have that 8 weeks, you have, like, halfway through the semester, you're, like, super busy, and you can only really focus on what is in front of you in terms of school,
Yeah.
but when you get to work full time, you have a little bit of time on your weekends more so, like, generally, and, there's a lot more time to just let yourself grow as a person, which in itself is
Yeah.
also very exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I 100% agree.
And so another thing that I wanted to also talk about, because I always like to ask our guests, is so what piece of advice would you give to students who are looking to go into a role that's similar to yours?
I would say talk to people. Talk to everyone. Like you never know, even if they're not in the same industry or not in the same role, you never know who they know. You never know what could inspire you out of a conversation that's like completely random and about something totally different. Yeah, you never know. And everything happens through people always through building connections. So Even if you're scared to network, it doesn't have to be like a scary formal networking thing. It could just be a coffee with somebody. It could be anything you want it to be, really.
For sure. And I think that, like, I want to definitely point out again is like yours, it doesn't even have to be people that you think would be in the industry that you might want to be with. Cause you mentioned that
Yeah,
your mother's friend was the one who kind of like set you on this like thought journey because like maybe be social even within your own family gatherings and friends and
exactly.
just talk about what you're interested in because like you said, you never know who knows who they could be.
Yeah.
So
Or if someone's, I don't know, for example, starting a business that you're like, oh, that's such a cool idea. And it inspires something else in you. Like you honestly just never know where these conversations could lead you. So just being open minded and yeah, talk to people. I know. And like be genuinely curious and interested in what they're up to. And I know that everybody gets that advice. And I heard that advice over and over and over again when I was in school as well. They were like, set up coffee dates with people, ask them like to talk to you about their career journey, and you're like, "Oh, I really don't wanna, like, bother them. I really, like they probably don't have time," but you'd be surprised who are very open about or very open and willing to talk about anything, especially when someone's, like, young and getting into the industry, so I think, yeah, set up those coffee dates, go to networking events, do it all.
and do you have any suggestions if someone wanted to set up a coffee date, for example? Like if someone wanted to reach out to someone like you, what would you recommend a student do? Like how should they proceed? Like to be polite but still, you know, get that
Yeah.
coffee date.
Yeah, I think email or LinkedIn is the best, and I think you should personalize your message. Like, don't send something generic because it honestly sounds like it's coming from like a fake account or fake profile. So if you're just like, "Hey, let's grab coffee," that's like super generic. I think just point out like, "Hey, I think your experience in this is really cool. I'm interested in this direction because of my passion for whatever. Would love to grab a coffee and pick your brain," something like that. So just make sure it's personal, like tie it back to what kind of caught your eye about it. Just be genuine.
I think that's a really key thing. I mean, as well, like you doing communications, at the end of the day, it should just be something that is genuine, like promoting yourself, like having a brand thing. Like we get so caught up in like, creating like the perfect essence, but like, maybe just be genuine to yourself. I mean, obviously you don't want to like put on display that your worst qualities, but at the same
Yeah,
time, like maybe I think we're a little too in our heads about things.
for sure.
Mhm.
And join the Young Professionals Network events. We've got lots of events coming up in 2023. So it'll be fun for, I think, anyone who's in the food industry or looking to get into the food industry. Those will be really great opportunities to have really fun and inspiring conversations.
I love that. And I'll make sure to link them in the show notes for anyone who wants to find out more about that. But if people wanted to find you or the OPMA, where can we find them?
So I'm on LinkedIn. First name Sandra, Sandra, last name Ulewicz. And on LinkedIn, you can find the OPMA Young Professionals as well. Um,
Love it. I love the world of online. It's so easy to find
yes.
anything. So,
Yes.
well, thank you so much, Sandra, for taking time to come on the show. I really enjoyed our conversation and learning more about like what a communications manager does because I think in the world of so much information, I think that your job is really the one who like condenses it and makes it very clear. So that's very
Yes.
cool.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
That was episode 61 of the Food Grads podcast. All the notes to this podcast can be found on the Food Grads blog or by clicking on the Student Grads tab on the homepage. There, you can find any notes to past or future episodes. Do you know anyone you would like me to interview on the show? Perhaps yourself. Or maybe there's a specific career path you would like me to explore. Then reach out and let me know. You can email me at veronica.hislop, Hislop, at foodgrads.com, or any of the Food Grads social media channels. Hope to hear from you. I love hearing stories from people like Sandra, even though it's inspiring to hear about those people who have a clear vision after graduation and just go for it. Not everyone's like that. For many, you're just trying to get through the semester, which is a big task in itself. So if you're trying to get through the semester, that's okay. Focus on it. School is not easy. Trust me, I've had my difficulties. It's nice to hear from people like Sandra, who just really enjoyed the university experience, tried clubs, tried new things, worked part time, did all these experiences, and didn't have it 100% figured out in the end, but still came to something that she really enjoys. So I think that there is a light in the tunnel, and it can be really easy to forget about that when you're in school. So use this story as an inspiration. I actually met Sandra at the Royal Agricultural Fair in Toronto, Ontario, back in November, and I forgot about how fun these events are. Like, if you live in a city or a suburb, you can just become so detached to agriculture and like where your food is grown. I hope that if you're listening to this podcast, maybe you are a little bit more aware and you're thinking about a career there, but for a lot of us, we can forget about it. And without a vehicle, if you don't drive, it can become very difficult to explore these places. Though one thing I like is that fairs, like the Rural Agricultural Fair, gives you a taste of all the cool things being done in agriculture. It was really cool. So, what I guess I'm just trying to say is if you have a chance, go to your county fairs, go to these agricultural fairs, go to these, even if you're not actively pursuing a career on the agriculture side, maybe you're going into food. You're just gonna have a really great time, and I think that it's really cool to talk to the growers, the producers. A lot of them are there sharing their products and just hearing their stories, being inspired by them. It's a really fun event, and I wish that it happened more often. Anyways, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and I will see you next time.